Good evening. Thank you all for coming. This is a very important meeting to the district and to me, as I'm going to have to ultimately make a decision to vote on this. For those that don't know me, I'm Janet Kilpatrick. I'm the councilperson for the 3rd District. This is not a pleasant subject, I know, to many of you. I've gotten calls and emails from some people asking me why we would think that we need to raise taxes and can't we continue just to cut things. We have the county executive here tonight. He's going to go through a slide program for you, explain how we got to where we are and where we need to go to keep this county viable. So I would like to introduce to you Matt Meyer, our county executive.
Thank you, Councilwoman Kilpatrick. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
It's good to see you. I'm a little concerned, those in the back. I want to make sure you can see the slides. We're going to be working a lot from our slideshow tonight, so you can see it, Diana? You good? Okay, feel free to get up and move up if you need to. I also wanted to take a minute and give the folks at Hockessin Fire Company a round of applause for what they do every day, and of course also for hosting us tonight. There are 3 basic things we're going to do tonight. First, we're going to run through a slideshow that is an abbreviated presentation of the budget that I gave last Tuesday night in County Council chambers. It will include both some accomplishments, some things we've done the last 15 months that you may not be aware of, and then get into some of the numbers of the budget and some of the decisions we've made in this year's budget that helps you make a decision about what you think about this budget. Second of all, we have polling software. We're going to take a poll of people in this room of various questions about the county, about the budget. So we will show you. Oh, there it is. There's the site that we'll go to. So you can feel free to go to it now on your smartphone. There's not going to be anything there until the presentation is complete. And third, I'll take questions and comments. We're here to listen much more than we are here to talk, to hear from you, hear your input. We're always looking for input on our budget and how to make your county government better and stronger. Is Kenny Dunn here? Are we doing note cards? Okay, we have note cards as well. You can feel free to write your questions on a note card. If you don't want to write it on a note card, there will be an open question period where you line up in the microphone. You probably will get your question answered a little bit quicker if you write it on a note card, because I usually go through those first. But we've been hard at work for you the last 15 months, and we've done a number of things that the county has never done before in history. There's a national standard of answering 911 calls, where there's an expectation that 90% of 911 calls be answered within 10 seconds. 90% of calls answered within 10 seconds. It's a national standard that we had never before achieved in county government. I believe one of the most important functions we perform in county government is answering your 911 calls as quick as possible. Thanks to Chief Jeff Miller, who's here, who heads our emergency communications department. We achieved that standard for a couple weeks last year, and in the first 2 months of this year, we achieved that standard. So we are answering 911 calls faster than ever. We also have more than double the solar energy capacity in the state. We've had an investor come in and commit to generating 100 megawatts of solar energy just in this past year, in our first year in office. We've advanced 125 police investigations through the use of cutting-edge DNA technology. We maintained our AAA bond rating. We've, for the first time in county history, opened all expenses of the county up to county taxpayers to see. You can now go online and see every dime that we spend as easily as you can go online and look at your own bank statement. You can go online at checkbook.nccde.org. We've expanded the use of something called the Rave Panic button, which makes public facilities safer. Schools across the county are starting to use this, which enables public safety to virtually enter a building in a time of crisis. We've eliminated backlogs of property tax exemption applications and property tax appeals. And we've also, as I'll talk about a little bit later, dramatically increased our short-term tax collection. We collected $1.5 million of additional taxes in the first 45 days after taxes were due in 2017. We've also improved sudden cardiac arrest survival rates. We had the most survivors, were 52 individuals. When 911 was called, their heart had stopped beating, and thanks to the great work of our emergency medical services, our paramedics, along with bystanders, we saved 52 lives. That number keeps increasing because of our commitment to paramedics, which I'll talk about a little bit later as well. We set a record for library system usage in the county. We launched a Pulse Point app, which is an app you can download on your phone. It tells you when someone near you is suffering a cardiac arrest incident. Just the night before, we announced it a couple weeks ago. Just the night before last, we had the first time someone in the county was saved because of this app, where the app goes off if someone near you is suffering a cardiac arrest incident. It enables bystanders to attend to that person faster than our paramedics can. We also reviewed a record number of development plans in 2016, and we enacted legislation and put together the most comprehensive strategy to address vacant housing in the history of the county. One of the most pressing problems we face here in the county, as is true across the state and the country, is the opioid epidemic. We've put 4 specific strategies in place to address this. One is the Hero Help program, which has been in existence for several years in the county. It focuses on what's called law enforcement assisted diversion. We don't arrest people out of addiction, we get them the help and treatment that they need. We received a grant through the University of Baltimore for that program. And for the first time, we have a full-time coordinator working to assist those facing overdoses. For the first time in county history, firefighters in Newcastle County, every fire station, including this one, can access Narcan free of charge. So ambulances now going out to opioid overdoses, they all carry Narcan. We hired a law firm to sue opioid manufacturers, distributors, and sellers. The point of that is to recoup some of the cost of fighting the opioid epidemic. As I'll explain later, our paramedic calls have spiked in part due to the opioid epidemic. We don't think it's fair for the taxpayers to pay all of that burden, so we're trying to go after the source, the cause of those who both caused the harm and created the cost, and try to recoup some of those funds. And finally, a few weeks ago, we launched an innovative program with Christiana Care called Operation SOS. What that's about is we noticed in our paramedic calls, we're getting quite a few calls from the same addresses repeatedly, overdoses, drug overdoses. And we said, wouldn't it make sense, rather than waiting for them to call 911, if we affirmatively sent community health workers, trained workers, to go and help channel those people into treatment? We did that in partnership with Christiana Care. And again, it's important to highlight all 4 of those things combined. There's a total of about $10,000 of county outlay in all 4 of those programs. In a $190 million budget, the cost of this is minimal. We're collaborating with other partners to have innovative strategies to fight the opioid epidemic. So the challenge is all this good stuff we're trying to do, how do we pay for it? It's important to note that since fiscal year 2013, our expenses as a county government have exceeded our revenue. Our expenses have exceeded our revenue. If you look at the amount of money we've been spending each year at the end of the year, and the amount of money we're taking in as revenue, primarily through property taxes, but also through real estate transfer taxes and through other fees we collect, those revenues do not equal those expenses. It may be hard to see from where you are, but the red line is higher than the blue line. And if you look at the next 2 years at the projections, the red line is increasing at a much faster rate. So that gap is getting broader. In my house, I can't spend more money than I make every month. If I do it for a month or two, I can't do it for the long term. You can't do that, and we can't do it either in county government. So that's the core of our problem. The consequence of that is what's called a tax stabilization reserve, this sort of pot of money that we built up from your taxes over the course of years leading up to 2013. it got up to $54.2 million. Over the past 5 years, we've been depleting that down so that now it's under $20 million. And sometime in calendar year 2019, we think about November, December of 2019, if we continue our expenditures at the same level, we will simply run out of money. We will not have any reserve left to tap into to balance our budget. So how did this happen, and how come that red line is increasing at such a faster rate than the blue line in future years? When I came into office, there were over $70 million of unpaid bills, of additional expenses we had to find a way to pay for over the next 10 years, over $70 million. For example, there was $4.9 million of increased salary costs. Weeks before the last election in 2016, my predecessor signed union agreements with nearly all of the employee unions that gave a 5% salary increase over 4 years. It also locked in our health care costs so that we pay 93% of the premiums of our employee health care. Those are locked into contracts through 2019, or actually until the middle of next year. So those are contracts that we have to abide by and have to live by. And those additional costs add up to about $66 million over the next 10 years. In addition, my predecessor committed to interest-only debt payments on a bond issuance in fiscal year 2015. That means that we're going to end up paying $3.4 million over 20 years, and there was no interest paid on the bonds for the first several years of the bonds. But now the principal payments are due, and of course they're balloon payments. So there's an additional payment we need to pay for years of not paying what we should have been paying. In addition, we committed to an additional $1 million of county services, things like the Route 9 library and other additional services across county government. We also financed some operating expenses through capital borrowing. We basically put some expenses on the credit card, about $500,000 of operating expenses, things like technology and some public safety equipment, things that it's important to buy, but you can't buy it if you don't have the money for it. And finally, as some people in this room may know, we risked $3 million on a business investment on the Delaware Board of Trade. We're not sure we're ever going to get that money back. So with this problem, with this tremendous additional cost and these depleting reserves, what priorities do we have? What priorities, what guideposts are we going to use when putting together this budget? I tell my team there are 5 things we need to do. First, we need to live within our means. And I've told County Council I will not sign a budget this year if the projected expenses exceed the projected revenues. Thanks, Ricky. You can't keep living that way. And second of all, our property, in terms of living within our means, it's really important to me, as someone who grew up here, that our property taxes are competitive. It's a good thing that our property taxes are low, and we need to do what we can to keep them low. Second, we need to reduce our debt spending. We can't continue putting things on the credit card to be paid out over 20 years. We need to govern honestly and efficiently, and that's part of coming here to talk to you and to get your feedback, to hear what you think about our proposals. Fourth, we need to collaborate for improved government service. We live in a small state, 950,000 people, and there are a lot of governments. There are a lot of municipal governments, there are county governments, there's state government. It only works if we all work together, and we need to invest aggressively in our future. So things we've done in the last 15 months to save money. As soon as I came in, we knew this problem existed, and we put serious savings measures into place. Every single hiring in the county was reviewed by me. We saved $4.1 million by reducing personnel costs. A lot of that's overtime costs. As I guess is mentioned later down, we saved $100,000 in non-paramedic overtime costs and also some seasonal employee hiring. We saved over $900,000 by terminating contractual services and streamlining operations. For example, this year, our use of outside legal counsel in our legal department is down by over 65%. We saved $1 million in reduced county vehicle purchases. My instruction in my executive office, the team that reported to me, is we had to start with ourselves and dramatically reduce our costs through salary savings and also cars, General managers of county departments have traditionally had vehicles that they drive around. We ended that practice, and we've saved over $600,000 in my first 18 months compared to my predecessor's last 18 months. Looking forward to next year, we're putting in place what we're calling a smarter governance strategy in our budget. And that starts with really stepping up our collections efforts. I don't think it's fair if I'm paying my property tax that the guy next door is not paying his or her fair share. So we're engaging in new practices. Brian Maxwell, my CFO, who's here, put a really innovative strategy into place where in the first 45 days after property taxes were due, he collected $1.5 million of additional property taxes. We believe that that's a record for the county. In addition, just this month, we got approval from the Votech school district, I guess last month, a couple weeks ago, and we're partnering with school districts across the county for the first time to collect long-term delinquent property taxes. Property taxes that are delinquent for over a year amount to 48% of our total delinquency, which is a problem, and we need to start collecting on these overdue taxes. In addition, as I mentioned, we're implementing a vacant housing initiative. There are about 1,100 vacant houses across the county. We've done a lot of work in recent months to register every single one of them. Now, the point of that is to reduce blight in neighborhoods across the county, to give people an opportunity to buy a vacant house at a reduced price, renovate it. But a consequence, pretty quickly we learned in the first week, we collected over $25,000 of property of overdue taxes and fees. It's also important to note that of the 2017 property taxes, 98.5% of them have been collected as of December 31st, is that right? So that's 3 months old, and we're expecting within 90 days to be at about 99% collection on last year's property taxes. The current outstanding amount, including all of our property taxes, including prior years, is $3.6 million. And there's sewer fees. Sewer fees is harder to collect on because a large percentage of property taxes are just paid through escrow agents. But we have current outstanding collectible fees is $9.8 million, which is a little misleading because the deadline to pay sewer fees was just 5 weeks ago. But we expect within the next 90 days to get that down closer to $6 million. In addition, we're reducing expenditures in next year's budget, just like we have historically. We're going to save another $3.5 million in salary expenditures through attrition, through eliminating some vacant positions that are funded but vacant. We're eliminating overtime expense, and we're eliminating seasonal positions. It's really important to me that our employees at the county have good morale and that we emphasize that they need to keep working hard and doing good work, but we don't need to keep spending money on positions that we just don't need for county services. In addition, through some innovations within our risk management office, we're projecting a savings of workers' compensation costs of over $500,000, $573,200. Through operational savings, we're reducing expenditures by $515,300. And through technology initiatives, we're saving $57,100 in the next fiscal year. So the problem we face is that after we do all of these things, 88% of our expense, over 88% of our expense is still locked into contracts that we're obligated to pay. 74.7% is locked into collective bargaining agreements that are signed through April of next year. So those are obligations that we have, legal obligations that we have to pay. 13.7% are locked into 20-year bond agreements through our debt service arrangements. So that leaves only 11.6% of the budget that we can really make sharp reductions in. While we're under pressure to reduce this spending, I want you to keep in mind that service expectations and service needs in many ways are expanding. They're expanding across our public safety departments. The demands on our libraries and parks, of course, are increasing. And I wanted to show you one example of that. This is a graph that shows our paramedic call data over the past 13 years, over the past 12 years, starting in 2005 through 2017. In 2005, we had 24,045 calls for service in that year, 2005. You can see that that number of calls slowly increased, and then the last 2 years especially spiked up to 36,966 calls. 36,966 calls. Now in 1990, the state established a statewide paramedic service, and they gave the county a 60% reimbursement. So our costs for this service, starting in 1990, were reimbursed from Dover at a rate of 60%. The problem is, as the states run into financial trouble over recent years, they've decreased that reimbursement amount. So last year, that reimbursement amount was decreased down to 24%. That decrease last year alone, which it was 30%, and it went to 24%, that cost us $1 million of annual revenue out of our budget. And keep in mind, while this is happening, the paramedic need is increasing, and that blue line shows our paramedic staffing. It shows that throughout this increase in service demand, our paramedic staffing has more or less remained constant. And so we just have to find the money from our budget to pay for this stuff. So one thing we started doing back in December is going to state legislators and say, we need you to pay your fair share of this. We asked for a 3% hotel tax. The city of Wilmington, about 10 years ago, was given the authority to raise a tax on hotels in the city of Wilmington up to 3%. So right now, if you go to the city of Wilmington and stay in a hotel, you actually pay a higher tax rate than if you stay in a hotel in Newcastle County outside the city of Wilmington. We've asked the state legislature to give us that same authority. And to be honest, it's a struggle. It's a struggle because you're asking them just to give us authority to raise a tax, and many state legislators don't have any incentive to vote for something like that. The second thing we've asked them to do is restore that paramedic reimbursement that's gone down to 24%, restore it to 50%. And third, we've asked them to enable us to give us a cap on the first-time homebuyer exemption. We're required by the state to provide an exemption to first-time homebuyers. Someone's buying a house for the first time, there's a real estate transfer tax that goes to the county. If you're a first-time homebuyer, you get an exemption, a partial exemption on that purchase, which is fair and good. We want to incentivize first-time homebuyers. Last year, we had a purchase come in for a $1.89 million house that got this first-time homebuyer exemption. That's not fair. And so we're asking the state to give us the authority to cap that exemption. The problem with it is the real estate lobby doesn't like it, and they're fighting hard in Dover with the legislators to put a cap on this purchase. Again, the state legislators, they don't have much incentive to do something that gives our government revenue. So I just want to emphasize to you, one thing you can do tonight, if you agree with the things I'm saying, is get in touch with your state legislators and encourage them to support these three proposals. Because just to be frank, we got to pay our bills. I've made it clear to county council, I will not sign a budget where the revenues are less than the expenditures. So if we don't get these additional revenues, we're going to have to find the revenue from somewhere else, or we're going to have to cut service levels. So here's our graph, the graph that I showed you before of our tax stabilization reserve at $54.2 million in 2013, sloping down the solid line to about $20.6 million. There's a red dotted line that shows the impact of our smarter governance package, our increased stepped up collections effort, our reduction in expenditures for fiscal year 19. That's the red dotted line. The black dotted line above it shows with the state revenue package added. So the consequence of that, what that shows is with these additional measures that I've spoken about, what that does is instead of our tax stabilization fund running out sometime in 2019, with that additional revenue, it'll run out sometime in 2020. Which in my view still isn't good enough. It means our expenditures are exceeding our revenues, and we need to keep tapping our reserves. So our balanced budget plan includes three elements. One is the smarter governance plan that I talked about, the smarter governance measures for fiscal year 19 in my budget. The second is the state revenue package, those three items I mentioned, the 3% hotel tax, the 50% paramedic reimbursement, and the cap on the first-time homebuyer exemption. And third, it includes a 15% property tax increase. Now, it's the first tax increase, it would be the first tax increase since 2009 in 9 years. And because of our assessment system, unlike revenues of other governments like the state government, even if income tax rates stay the same, because people's incomes grow over time, the state's revenues grow over time, even if the tax rate is constant. At the county, because all of our real estate values are based on 1983 assessed values, our property tax revenues year to year, even if your home is getting more valuable, our tax revenues at the county remain relatively flat. So this is the first time since 2009 that the county would get a substantive increase in revenue. What it means to you, hold on, go to the prior slide. What it means to you, the average homeowner in this district pays $747 per year in county property tax. So the average homeowner here would pay $112 more per year, which amounts to 31 cents more per day. We show you here an average tax bill for the district. It shows an increase, you can see at the top, county property tax in this past year in 2017 was $705.50. With other fees, crossing guard light fee, the total was $846.17. With the school taxes down at the bottom, it's $3,337.79. And with the increase we're proposing, it would be $3,443.62. Again, an increase of about 29 cents per day. Councilwoman Kilpatrick invited us to share her tax bill. It is paid, you can say. And so Councilwoman Kilpatrick has a beautiful house. And pays a total of, including county and school taxes, pays a total of $5,648.07. So her tax bill would go up $179 a year to $5,827.14. Hold on, Ricky, we'll take questions at the end if it's okay. You can actually do this with your own tax bill. We've set up a website, mybill.nccde.org. That you can go do now or whenever and check what the proposed tax increase would mean to you, and obviously feel free to share this with neighbors, friends, family. As I said earlier, it's really important to me. My staff knows I came in the first day, I said we have to do this without increasing property taxes. I do not want people's property taxes to increase. And I'll explain in a minute why we're proposing this. But I want you to understand that our property taxes, even after this increase, even including school taxes, still remains considerably below neighboring jurisdictions. What we did is we compared the effective property tax rate between Newcastle County and neighboring counties and cities in the area, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Maryland. Our current effective tax rate, based on actual market value, not your assessed value, but the market value, the current effective tax rate is 0.77%, and this change will increase the effective tax rate to 0.79%. So of the Newcastle County and the 16 counties we looked at, Newcastle County would continue to have the third lowest property tax rate in the area. The only two counties with lower tax rates are Kent and Sussex County, and the primary reason that they have lower tax rates is we have a $68 million annual county police force that does an amazing job, but the Kent and Sussex County don't need to pay for them, so they can have a lower tax rate. So here's what happens to our reserve levels with the balanced budget plan we proposed. With the smarter governance, the reduction in expenditures, increased collection, with the state revenue plan, which again, we need all your help to get that passed, and third, with the property tax increase we proposed. I don't know if you can see it there, but the blue line starting at $54.2 million in 2013 comes down to $20.6 million this year, and then it balances off that dotted green line that goes to 21.2 million next year, 22.2 million, 20. So we've stabilized our reserve account, so we're not going to run out of money. We do have choices. I mean, I've heard from a lot of people, this is our third town hall, and we do have choices. It's one reason we came here tonight to listen to you. There are ways that we can balance this budget just by reducing spending. I don't want it to take longer to receive a 911 call. I don't want it to take longer for paramedics to show up at your door. I don't want to decrease our police service. I don't want to decrease our parks and library service. But I said, as we went through this budget exercise, to my finance team, I want you to take a scenario where our revenues equal our expenditures without any increase in property tax. And I want you to decrease every department of county government equally. And I want you to show us the consequence that would have for services so that you understand the decisions we're making and you could advise us how you think it should be done. So if we made decreases, and it's a decrease of about $21 million in expense without any additional revenue, the consequence would be we would have to effectively stop proactive policing. A lot of the community policing we do in neighborhoods, we'd have to likely dissolve, according to our police chief, our community services unit, which is one of our most successful units in county government, or certainly in our county police force. There'd be a much longer paramedic response time. That 911 call response I told you, we're now a little bit above 90%. It would go down to 78%. So almost a quarter of your calls to 911 would take more than 10 seconds to answer. In addition, there'd be a 10% reduction in funding to the volunteer fire service. We'd also have to close 2 major parks, Carousel, Rockwood, Glasgow, or Banning. We'd have to pick 2 among them. Smaller district parks, we'd have to close about half of them because we couldn't afford to maintain them. We'd have to discontinue mowing at all of our neighborhood parks. There are 207 of them across the county. We'd have to close one of our larger libraries, Brandywine Library or Route 9 Library, and we'd have to do some other savings in our library department, likely closing something like the Ellesmere Library or defunding the Wilmington Library. And we'd also have to close Rockwood Museum or eliminate our sports league program. So I just show you this so you understand the choices that we're making to balance our budget. Since money is not being spent for vacant positions that will be eliminated, why consider this as savings? When we work it into our So let me read it. Since money is not being spent for vacant positions that will be eliminated, why consider this as savings? When we look forward and put our budget together, the number of positions is what determines how much money we allocate to salary. There's been a long time practice of holding open a lot of vacant positions, and it gives you some free money to play with throughout the year. So the money often gets spent one way or another. So by eliminating the vacant positions, even though you're like, wait a second, nobody's there anyway, it actually does reduce spending. Do residents of cities and towns pay the same county tax as do people in unincorporated areas? That's a great question. The answer is no, they do not. People residents of property owners in cities and towns who have a tax assessment in that city and town do pay often considerably less than people in unincorporated areas. For example, the average tax increase countywide for residents in incorporated areas is about $350 a year. The average average tax bill for people in incorporated areas. Thank you, David Greger. The average tax bill for people in incorporated areas is about $350 a year, so the average increase will be $50 a year, whereas in unincorporated areas it's more like $550 a year is the average property tax bill. However, the tax bill changes from incorporated area to incorporated area, so someone living in Newark pays a different county tax rate than someone living in Wilmington, who obviously pays a different county tax rate from someone living in unincorporated Newcastle County, such as here in Hockessin.
How are property values assessed? Are there any plans to adjust assessed property values? Property values were last assessed in Newcastle County in 1983. They were last assessed in Kent County in 1987, and they were last assessed in Sussex County in 1974. The county could reassess property. To reassess property based on the, right when I got in office, we started to investigate the possibility of reassessing property. Reassessment of property would take about 3 years and cost about $20 million. I showed you some of the numbers tonight, and I don't have 3 years and $20 million. I spoke with the governor, and I've spoken with a few state legislators about this issue. I believe the best way to do it is if the state does it in collaboration with the counties, and I'm very open to doing so. In case of eminent domain being exercised, is the property value considered to be the assessed value or market value or some other metric? I believe under constitutional law, eminent domain requires government to pay market value, but don't hold me to that. Can you reevaluate the $200 million budget for operations a year? Assume 0 per program and re-justify each expenditures. All of that should be done before and explained before we increase anything. So when I started this year, what I told each of my general managers is I wanted to see 0% growth in their budget, 0% growth in their budget, which is really something that no government does. And you have to keep in mind that I mentioned that there was a salary increase signed in 2016. That put into contract salary increases for employees of 0% in fiscal year 2015, 1% in 2016, 2% in 2017, and 2% this year. So asking a department manager to have 0% budget growth when salaries of all your employees is required to go up 2% is effectively telling them to decrease the size of their department. So they did that, and we found some additional savings as well. Look, we're at a point where we for some additional savings, I said, what is our least utilized library? When you look at our portfolio of libraries and you look at current metrics of library usage, what library would it make the most sense to scale down service in? We looked at it, and the obvious answer was Ellesmere Library. So we went and spoke to the Ellesmere Town Council about scaling down Ellesmere Library. Now keep in mind, there's right now, what we're looking at is a $21 million difference between revenues and expenses. Closing Ellesmere Library altogether would save us about $470,000. So it wouldn't get us even close to all the way there, but doing things like that would start to get us there. When I simply suggested it and met with the Ellesmere Town Council, we were bombarded with calls. County Council immediately voted 13-0, saying the county executive cannot close the Ellesmere Library. And so keep in mind, that's $470,000. So I understand people wanting to reduce spending. I'm with them and I hear them, but I just want people to understand reducing spending to the dramatic levels that people are asking will result in seriously reduced service levels. County government and state pensions are much more generous than private enterprise. What are you going to do to get current and future pension expenses under control and more in line with private enterprise? You want to take it, Brian? Brian Maxwell, our CFO, I'll hand this off to him.
So in 2011, the county restructured their pension plan, where they closed the pension plan to new employees, so all people that were existing in the plan could stay in the plan. But they did change to a hybrid plan, which is more traditional to what the private sector is used to, where more of the benefit was on the defined contribution as opposed to the defined benefit portion of it. So there is significant cost savings with moving to that model. The problem is the majority of our population today is in the old plan, so we don't have new participants going into that plan. So there will be requirements of additional annual contributions into that plan for a number of years until the number of participants start to die off, so to speak, but reduce in overall. So as far as pension reform from the county's perspective, they did that significantly in 2011. So.
Healthcare, it's also part of the question.
I don't see healthcare on there, but we'll answer it.
Yeah. So healthcare, there are things that we're looking at from the administration standpoint, but one thing that I'll communicate to everybody is that part of our collective bargaining agreements with the various unions, healthcare benefits are part of those negotiations. And so that is going to obviously take time to make changes to that. It will have to be through the collective bargaining process, which the county exec did mention that we're locked into those agreements till April 1st for the majority of them of 2019. But we are working with a benefits consultant. There is a health benefits committee that the county does have, which those recommendations or suggestions that would come forth would go through that committee. So it is something that's being discussed.
Are your benefits self-funded or fully insured?
We are self-insured. We do have some additional insurance where we have stop-loss protection, but we are a self-insured plan.
Thanks, Brian. I understand how hard it is to manage an organization and develop budgets. In many businesses, managers not only have to keep costs under control, but often must reduce costs and budgets. Have you considered using zero-based budgeting to develop budgets? If so, what were the results? If not, would you consider trying it? I think there are many in the community that have the skills and would help. We actually started the budget process. It was part of my budget presentation last Tuesday night. We're trying to slim it down to make it a little shorter than it was last Tuesday night. But when we started the process, we started with zero-based budgeting and ended up with a budget that reduces where the increase in expenditures is far less than it's ever been before. The problem, though, with a zero-based budget, as I mentioned, is that over 85% of our cost basis is locked into contracts, either long-term bond contracts or collective bargaining agreements through next year. So it's hard to cut when you're contractually obligated to make payments. This is my last one, so I'm hoping there are other questions. Good, thank you. Middletown was given a park, Silver Lake Park, 100 acres, under the Greenhouse administration. They've incorporated and do not pay the same tax as northern Newcastle County. If they need a park, they should pay the same taxes. Each of the municipalities that pay, incorporated municipalities pay a different county tax than people in unincorporated Newcastle County. That tax rate is based on a formula called the local service function. So when there are parks and library services offered, county parks and library services offered in an incorporated area, that actually does change the tax rate of the area. Council members are saying no to tax increase. Can your administration explain their plan? I don't. It's very early on in the process. I think, in fairness to a lot of the county council members, I think they're reviewing the plan. There are budget hearings over the next few weeks that are actually open to the public, and you all are welcome to attend. So I think at some point, certainly if people are not in favor of this plan, we'll want to hear what an alternative plan is. But we're not demanding to hear a plan at this time. Where do you report improper connections to Newcastle County sewers and unpaid sewer bills? Where do you report improper connections to Newcastle County sewers and unpaid sewer bills? This is a good commercial. 302-395-5700. That's our sewer department, our special services. 302-395-5700. That's where you report improper connections to Newcastle County sewers and unpaid sewer bills. It's important to note that that is really important. A lot of you can be the eyes and ears of us in trying to assist both in unauthorized sewer usage and in increased collections. Why do the council people who represent Wilmington get a full vote when residents pay a fraction of the tax rate and they don't get impacted by land use decisions? Why do the council people who represent Wilmington get a full vote when residents pay a fraction of the tax rate and they don't get impacted by land use decisions? I don't know anywhere in the country where county council members get a fraction of a vote proportionate to their taxes. And maybe they should. I'd be happy to entertain a proposal. Why not? Why not? It's interesting. Why not offer residents a discount to connect to Newcastle County sewers to generate future revenue? You know, it's a good question. Why not offer residents a discount to connect to Newcastle County sewers to generate future revenue? We are just starting now to look at septic systems across the county. They're bad for the environment. And we're trying to see if there's some way, and of course it's better for our sewer system and the financial viability of our sewer system, the more properties that we get on sewer. So we're looking at strategies like this, and there are a number of things in the works like this to raise revenue and decrease cost over time. Things like this are not going to address our immediate problem of not being able to fully fund our paramedics, police force, our libraries, and our parks in the immediate future. Yeah, go ahead. So the question is, why not require all new housing to connect? There's new housing going in even now on septic. I agree with you completely. In many states, the environmental regulator for the state regulates septic system because it really is an environmental issue. In Delaware, quite frankly, regulation of septic system is really, really lax. And I would love to work on a proposal, and we're putting one together in my office so that the future will be a future on sewer and not on septic. But thank you, I appreciate the question. What impact have corporate restructurings had on budget projections? What impact have corporate restructurings had on budget projections? It's a good question. It hasn't had a direct impact because our property taxes are based on 1983 assessments. So if there's a merger that changes property value, it doesn't immediately have an effect on our assessed value. But I will say this, there were 446 property tax appeals when I came into office, 446. The philosophy of the prior administration, when someone appeals a tax assessment, was to let it sit on the shelf, to not challenge that property tax assessment. There's a process that goes to the Board of Assessment Review. The problem is if you entertain that appeal, someone appealing a property tax, a fair amount of those, their tax assessment will be reduced because it's fair that it gets reduced. And as a result, your budget for your property tax revenues needs to be decreased. So there's a lot of incentive for someone sitting in my seat to say, whoa, we're not going to entertain these appeals. We're just going to put them on a shelf. And as long as the appeal is pending, the property taxpayer is still obligated to pay their historic amount. We got a number of tax appeals, and I mentioned it only because a few of those companies that appealed had gone through restructurings and mergers, and in the course of the transaction said, wait, our property tax number is way too high. Our assessment value is wrong for what it should be for the area. And my instruction to my team was to clear off these property tax appeals, to go through them and give the property tax payer due process. And so we've cleared that down. As of today, I think we have about 12 left. And that did have some effect. Hotel DuPont, for example, which wasn't really a merger, but Chemours, DuPont company owned it. Then when Chemours spun off, Chemours took Hotel DuPont. Chemours had an assessed value of $43 million on the Hotel DuPont, so we would charge them tax based on a $43 million value for that property. They came forward with appraisers, multiple appraisers, and lawyers saying the accurate appraisal value is $9.5 million for that property, that it had decreased in value nearly 5 times. We got them to agree to a value of $34 million. So it's better than 9.5, but we lost some revenue there, going from 43 million to 34 million. That was one of the largest examples. I'm hearing whispers in the back that people don't understand 15% in county property tax only, not the total. First of all, speak up, don't whisper. That's why I'm here. And even if it's just a question like this, like I don't understand what you're saying. 82% of the taxes we collect countywide, 82% of the taxes we collect countywide are school district taxes. Our taxes for Red Clay, Christina, Votech, Colonial, Appaquiddick, and Brandywine School District, 82%. 18% of your taxes go to the county government to fund things like your police force, your paramedic service, your 911 service, your land use department, which is 77% self-funding, I think, through fees, your land use department, your parks, your library. So only 18% of the taxes we collect go to the county. So understand, when you get your tax bill, if you're like me, probably the first thing you do is you just look at the number at the bottom and you pay. Of that big number at the bottom, only 18% of that goes to the county. So we're not increasing your taxes 15% on the big number at the bottom. We're actually increasing it on a significant but smaller number at the top, which usually is in the hundreds, or maybe in Janet's case with a big beautiful house, a little over $1,000.
Can I just...
Go ahead, Janet. Councilwoman Kilpatrick, excuse me.
Let me just make the point that we do not set the rate on school taxes. That is a state function. We do the administration for them. For that, we get a small fee, but we bill and collect the money and then turn it over to the state. Other than that, we have no play in the school taxes. So
let me tell you a secret. Since 2016, Councilwoman Kilpatrick has taught me a lot of things about county government. And now I want to give her a small instruction. We do not take a fee on school taxes. So we do it free of charge. We collect school taxes.
I saw Brian's head going, no.
So why not? It's a good question. We've been talking to the school districts about, again, things like this. I think it makes sense. But they take time. They don't happen. It's a frustration of mine, having been in small business myself. I say it makes sense. Let's do it, and let's do it yesterday. Things like this take a long time. I encourage you to speak to Representative Hockessin, who I know will wave to me there and back, and Senator Lavelle. I don't know if he still is here, but mention it to your representatives. We'd be happy to take a fee and help reduce the burden of your county property tax. There is a vacant home in my development. Calls have been made to the county. Nothing is being done. This is a new development with an eyesore. We have, do you want to talk about this registry? We have a registry of 1,100 vacant homes. We can't get to everyone in the first year, but we have a comprehensive plan that we're going through. Rich, why don't you come up and talk about it a little bit? This is Rich Hall, who was the director of planning, a cabinet secretary in the state of Maryland for 8 years before coming to Newcastle County last year to run our land use department.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So what the executive is referring to is a vacant housing strategy, and as he mentioned, we have over 1,000 vacant properties that have been inventoried in the county. We're working on a number of different tools to repurpose those properties, whether it's taking them to sheriff's sale or making better use of them, or ideally trying to get the private sector to move back into those homes, and again, to repurpose them, to put them back on the tax rolls, so to speak, and make them useful. If there's a code enforcement issue, give the department a call. The card that Executive read said there was a vacant property in a new subdivision. So call our department. It's 5555, and we will get someone out there to take a look at it. 395. Yes, the full number, sorry. 395 and then 5555. 4 fives will get you to the department. No.
Thanks, Richard. Additional question, the developer and builder are not taking care of issues with road, sewers, and concrete issues homeowners are experiencing in Walker Farm Estates. There are also empty lots that are supposedly being sold, but no building is being done. I'd encourage you, I'd ask you, please call our Department of Land Use, 395-5555. It's really important. A lot of times you're our eyes and ears. Again, 395-5555. If you see issues like this, even if it's not the questioner in your community. How are police officers trained to deal with females who report sexual assaults? How are police officers, you want to deal with? Major McLucas? How are police officers trained to deal with females who report sexual assaults? Major McLucas of the County Police Department.
Good evening, everyone. We have specially trained officers in our criminal investigations unit that have years of experience in doing that. We have both male and female officers. It's a very complex situation. It might be better if that person wants to talk offline, but it's a rather involved process. You report it. We have a patrol officer that goes out. It is difficult when you have a male dealing with a female victim, but we try to do the best we can. It also, the follow-up aspect of it gets assigned to a detective in our criminal investigations unit. It's a difficult question to ask because it's very complex. So there's a lot of avenues that we take with it. There's SANE examinations that take place at the Christiana Hospital, forensic examinations. So I'm kind of at a loss as to exactly where the question is going. So I think it's best if we talked offline. If you want to meet me over on the side, I could ask you a few more questions to kind of understand what it is that you're looking for. Mm-hmm.
I also should emphasize, a couple weeks ago, we launched what's called Text to 911. Text to 911. I hope some of you saw in the news, we really tried to get it out that now what we tell you is if you can call 911 in emergency situations, you should call 911. If you can't call 911 because it's a dangerous situation, domestic violence, or there's some disability where you're unable to talk or unable to hear, you can now text, simply send a text to 911. They emphasize that you cannot send emojis, right, Chief Miller? No emojis. So don't say, please send a picture of a fire truck. You have to send words. Will Newcastle County still have the senior discount on taxes? Yes, we still have the senior discount and disability discount. If so, why? Give the discount to seniors who are still working. FT, I think that means full-time. Oh, thank you. You didn't even see the card, and you. That's impressive. He's reading. So why give the discount to seniors who are working full-time? I believe the discount is based on assessed value, right? Do you want to talk about it, Brian?
So to qualify for a senior discount, there are, I think, a couple of thresholds that you would have to meet. One was your income couldn't exceed a certain level, and then also your assessed value can't exceed a certain level as well. So it's kind of, I would say, means tested. So people that really shouldn't be getting the discount aren't getting the discount. So there are, I don't have them memorized, but I know there are certain thresholds that you have to meet.
And just to address that question more holistically, so we do get, wait, I'm a senior, or I know a senior who's working full-time, why isn't that senior paying the same amount that I'm paying? I think the truth of it is, part of it is the cost. If you make the program needs to be relatively simple. If you add complexity to it, the cost of administering the program might exceed any savings in the program. I believe we do want to give some assistance to certain seniors and certain disabled individuals, and as long as we give that assistance, we want to cap it at some level, and there may be some people who we think are unfairly taking advantage. But we got to be careful if we change the whole program, not to sort of throw out the baby with the bathwater, if you will. So what is the outlook past 2019? Will the tax increase provide sustainability, or will we need to revisit next year? What we tried to show here is that the proposal we're presenting does provide long-term sustainability. There are ways to do this where we can just get it through this year and then next year be back in front of you again with something piecemeal that doesn't address the long-term problem. This will raise enough revenue for us to address the problem in the long term, and we believe find other ways to realize cost savings in that time period that will balance our budget for the long term. Is the property tax increase effective for both personal and commercial property? Yes. It's 15% property tax increase across the board for both commercial and residential property. All the examples we give are residential, simply because that's who we expect come to most of these town halls. But most of our largest taxpayers, at least our largest 10, and I would bet our largest 100 or more taxpayers are commercial taxpayers. So they'll actually be paying much larger sums than any resident would be. How can I become involved in the vacant housing initiative? Is there a public list of vacant properties available for purchase? You want to take this one, Rich?
That's a good question, and as we're putting it together, this inventory, and we go out and we register the properties, we go inspect them, and we put them through a hearing process to officially take them what we think are vacant, and then to do all we can to contact the property owners, and then once we're certain that they are vacant, and we get them on what we call the registry. So there's an inventory that we get from a number of different sources of information, and then we take that through a few steps to ensure that they are indeed vacant. So we're in the process of doing that now. We don't have a publicly posted list, but certainly you can call us and we can talk about areas you may be interested in. We are working internally, and this is this vacant housing strategy I mentioned before when I walked up here, and the county executive mentioned, involves a number of different departments: the executive department, finance, community services. So there's a number of us on this team working on this, and the Department of Law as well. And so as we are trying to make this whole process work, we are talking about ways to reach out to the community, whether it's nonprofits, individuals that are interested in buying property. So we're not quite there yet, but certainly give us a call, or you can talk to me after here on the side, and we can figure out how to connect you with that. We don't have like a setup thing to hand you over right now for how to get directly engaged, but happy to talk to you about it.
How do you determine what's the difference between vacant and abandoned?
Repeat the question.
The question was, how do you tell the difference between vacant and abandoned? Well, some of it's just semantics, but what we do is, first, usually someone calls us and tells us there's a vacant property or abandoned, and then we go out and we try to find the property owners, and we look at a number of different things. Is there some of them obvious things, right? Is there mail piling up? Have they been paying utility bills? Does the place look abandoned? Sometimes people can be gone for a long time, right? And a long vacation, and certainly we're not after those places. But usually it's pretty obvious if it's been abandoned. And again, we then track down through a number of different means to find out, to ensure, yes, it is indeed abandoned. So. Yeah. Okay.
Is the county taking advantage of all available federal grants? It's a good day to ask. This morning we announced a federal grant we received from the U.S. Department of Justice through the Criminal Justice Council here in Delaware to improve our policing by collaborating with Connections. Many public safety incidences involve mental health issues, and our police department, Major McLucas and Colonel Bond, are thinking very creatively and innovatively about how to address root causes of violence and root causes of crime. So we received a federal grant to help subsidize our police efforts with mental health, actually in collaboration with NAMI, the National Association of Mental Illness, I think, NAMI. And actually, I just received word coming in here today that for the first time ever, we received a $400,000, actually, my staff doesn't even know this, we received a $400,000 grant for the Route 9 library that I believe is from the federal government. So we are working around the clock to collaborate with all partners we can find to take advantage of federal grant money.
Matt, what's that grant money go to at the library?
At the library, I'm actually not even sure. We write so many grants, I don't even remember what this one's about. It's like a 21st century fund. I believe what it is it's our library, it's at Route 9 Library doing a lot of creative programming, reaching out to schools, and it's to do collaboration with schools to get kids reading more and address illiteracy problems. Yeah, another question?
So you had a chart up there that stipulated that at some point we had $54 million in the call.
Yep.
Somehow we got to that. Services were there, everything was happening, copacetic, and we had $54 million stockpiled away. What changed? I didn't see a dramatic increase in services, I didn't see any change in services, but all of a sudden we started using our savings.
So the question is, the graph starts there in 2013 with $54.2 million in reserve. Somehow we got to that $54 million point, and why is there this dramatic dramatic decrease in our reserve levels? He doesn't see a dramatic increase in service to pay for that decrease, that decreased reserve level. So the first issue is that the way we got to that $54 million reserve level is during the Coons administration, reserves were almost out, and he raised taxes twice, the second time by 25%. So if you extend this out, you would see the reserves jumping up to based on the 25% tax increase, and then decreasing down from there. Related to that is the fact I mentioned that if you look at the state government revenues, a lot of it is income tax and corporate franchise tax. Well, those tax bases are increasing over time. So if you keep the tax rate the same, the government revenue increases. If I made $50,000 this year and I make $60,000 next year, even if my tax rate is constant, I'll pay more tax. In the county, things are different because it's 1983 assessed values. Our property tax revenues are almost flat. They increase slightly when there's new construction. When new houses come on board, they pay. Obviously, we receive more tax revenue from that, but they grow at less than 1%, while our expenses, on average, year to year over time, are growing about 4 to 5%. So what we're working hard to do, and it takes time to do, is to shrink down that 4 to 5% of expenses. Now, in this year's budget, I'm proposing is closer to 2%. So that's sort of the quick answer. And another answer is some of the things I mentioned of adding on expense without having the revenue to pay for it. If Carousel closes or ceases the horse operations, by deed the property reverts to the DuPont family. Is the county still responsible to pay for the loans taken out for the improvements? So we mentioned up there potentially closing Carousel, potentially closing Rockwood. We have not. There are a lot of legal issues involved in doing all sorts of things that we mentioned up there, even sort of decreasing our police service, doing anything to decrease our 911 service or paramedic service. We have statutory obligations, so it's not as easy as scaling it down. But I just want people to understand the kinds of hard decisions we'll have to make. But it's a good point about Carousel. I've been reading that without the tax increase, libraries could be affected. I really rely on the Hockessin Library and am concerned about its future. Look, to be frank, I'm concerned too. We had a decision a couple months ago as we put together this budget. Do we announce the closure of several libraries, or do we ask people to pay a little bit more in taxes? We made the decision to ask people to pay a little bit more in taxes. As I like to say, when I was a kid, growing up off 202, I always thought the library was free. You walk in, it's free. Library cards are free, but it's actually not free. We're all paying for it. Can you please invite the state legislators to share their perspective on the proposal? I don't know if you mean right now. I don't know if they're still in the room. They're not. But I invite each of you to ask your state legislators to share their perspective on this proposal as well. You want to do yours?
So I got a question here. It said, we'd like to know why a statement is not sent out as a receipt of taxes paid for a year for federal tax proof. Recently moved here. This was always done in New Jersey. So what I'm being advised is that your canceled check, if you mailed in your property taxes, your canceled check would be your receipt as proof to the federal government that you paid your taxes. If that is not suffice, then if you wanted to mail a self-addressed envelope to us, we would send out the receipt via the mail.
Did you get email also?
That's even better for us. If that's one thing. So one of the questions was, can you do that via email? And we would like to move in that direction. Unfortunately, it's something that we haven't been collecting over time, but in talking to my staff, it's one thing that we're requesting as we get information and contact with taxpayers that we're requesting their email address, because it's a lot more efficient to operate that way. Thank you for the question. The other question is medical insurance is the elephant in the room. It's at least 80% of all costs and will continue to increase. Add this to the retirement fund. How can these costs be managed? I think I touched on this briefly in my earlier comments that healthcare costs are part of our collective bargaining agreements. I'll just start an example. At the county, usually you would require some spousal coordination. If your spouse works for another employer, if their employer provides health insurance, then they should have to take their health insurance as primary. That doesn't always happen at the county as far as that coordination of benefits. So a lot of times, I think the way it's written is that if X percent of the cost of the benefits by your spouse taking the benefits provided by their employee exceeds a certain amount, then they can be on the county's plan. So that means we're getting all the claims with regards to that, as opposed to their employer paying those claims. So these are some of the changes that have to be discussed and be negotiated, but they're not easy changes, and it's a process. But that's an example out there. Matt touched on it earlier about the percentage. Currently, the county pays 93% of the premiums. The employees pay 7%. What I had been advised that percentage was 91.5%. But then the unions filed a grievance regarding that percentage, how it was being calculated, and the previous administration agreed to 93%. So, and put it in the contract. So when you talk about cost reductions as far as the county's share of medical expenses, it went the opposite direction as far as cost share, as far as that. So.
I've exhausted the pile of questions. I don't know if anyone yeah, go ahead.
Can you give us an example of how reassessment will happen? So use an imaginary number such as a house that's $300,000. It's assessed now at $100,000, $83,000, whatever. What percentage taxes are paid on that house? And if that house is reassessed at $300,000, how will the property taxes change?
Okay, so the question is, give us an example of how property taxes will change in a reassessment. So the first thing to emphasize, and one reason why I'm not focusing on it now, and why I think counties have not done it for so long, is that reassessment by law by state law is revenue neutral. Reassessment is not a way to dig in your pockets and get more money. Reassessment is a way to allocate the cost among taxpayers, among property owners, more fairly. So, for example, just like we take the census, and maybe this is a bad example with gerrymandering, but we reapportion census districts every year based on the population because it changes over time. We're supposed to look at property values every few years and reapportion who pays what share of the taxes. So it's not about county government or state government or schools getting flush with cash. It's about us getting the same amount of cash, but getting it in a more accurate way based on your property value today, not based on your property value in 1983. So the way it happens is, and again, this is all, we've spoken to a number of experts on this matter. One of the leading experts actually in the state is David Greger, who works in our finance department. And what we would do is first, we would get an accurate assessed value of your property and of every property in the county, and that's what takes years. Once we get that value, so let's say my assessed value today, to keep numbers easy, let's say my assessed value today on my property is $100,000 based on 1983 values. And let's say, it's a good thing I was a math teacher, it was $100,000. And let's say after the reassessment, my home is valued at today's values at $500,000. Okay, a lot of people hear that and they say, oh my God, my taxes are going up 5 times, right? I pay $3,000, I'm gonna pay $15,000. That's not true, because the next step is we reset the rate. So let's say, just to keep things simple, that the property tax rate, which I showed you, it's 0.77% today, but just to keep the numbers easy, let's say we had a 5% property tax rate today. So on your $100,000 of assessed value, you're paying $5,000 in property taxes today. If your assessed value went up to $500,000, the first thing that would happen is the property tax value would reset, so you would be paying somewhere around $100,000. Depending on what, if the average home, if the average property, commercial and residential, across the county increased by more than 5 times, right? Which means everybody else's, or the majority of properties appreciated more than yours, your tax bill would actually go down. If the majority of properties appreciated less than 5 times, right, you would have to pay a little bit more of your fair share. According to estimates we get from the University of Delaware, it's called the Coefficient of Dispersion. There's a belief based on current studies that the overwhelming majority, in fact, nearly all of residential property owners would not pay more than 15% of their current property taxes or less than 15%. So everybody would increase or decrease within a band. But again, it's been a long time and it's very speculative. And it's also important to note that the longer we wait to reassess, the higher that change will be once we actually do reassess. How did I do, David? All right? Close enough?
Hi, my name is Roger Jones. I'm a 25-year resident in Newcastle County. First off, I'd like to commend you for taking the time and effort to be here to explain the budget, but also, more importantly, to take those front-end expense reductions that you have during the early part of your administration. That speaks well to, you're caring for the taxpayer, which is very important.
I'm one too.
Yeah. My comment, I have 2 of them. First, you're dealing with 2 structural budget issues. One being a 2-year one, the second one, though, being bond payments. And the latter one actually concerns me more because I expect that that's going to be a growing portion of the budget in coming years. My comment about expenses and taxes are, while you've done a bit to reduce expenses, according to my calculations, it's roughly about 2.5% to 3% of the annual operating budget. You're asking taxpayers for an additional 15%. I don't see that as being shared sacrifice. While I commend the county's level of services, it's a great county to live in, we do a great job, I think you really need to take a harder look at county services, important, less important, and perhaps not as important, for additional expense reductions. Because I think the more fair approach is a balance between expense reductions and tax increases, something in the equivalent of roughly, 9 or 10% each way. With that said, that's a difficult pill to swallow. It may not be able to be done in 1 year. So if you can't do it this year, you should look at next year's budget and do some serious public outreach to get feedback on those services. Everybody's going to want to protect those things that they hold dearest, but it's important basically to see which of those services are really providing important services to taxpayers and perhaps which ones are not. With respect to the long-term budget, I think you made a comment that 15% increase in property taxes will provide a sustainable budget in the years to come. And I just think that is not accurate. And the reason I say that is because unless we're looking at additional homes being built in this county at a significant rate or more commercial properties, your largest revenue source is property taxes. And they are projected basically to be flat to slightly increasing. There's no way you're going to cover the nut of a 3 to 4 to 5% budget increase in future years if your revenue sources aren't going to be increasing. So I would just give careful attention to the fact that, I think everybody should expect to pay more in property taxes, but it should be reasonable. And while obviously we've seen a drawdown in the rainy day fund to basically balance the budget, my suggestion to you and county council is our state has a balanced budget law. The county should give serious consideration to doing the same thing at the county level because you're only going to be here for 1 or 2 terms. And I think that's the right way to treat taxpayers, is by everybody's got to balance their checkbooks, and the county should be able to do theirs too.
Okay, wait for a minute, Roger. Thank you. I have a question for you. What services, I agree with much of what you said. What services would you cut? You're saying we're at the point now where, as we say in my office, we got to cut bone. We've cut a lot of the fluff out. Now we're at the point where the only way to cut is to cut bone. And so where would you cut?
Well, I think basically one of the places you could start at is with county parks. Obviously, they're recreation, they're important, but I'm just saying from my personal standpoint, that would be one area I'd look at. I can go down. I don't have the budget in front of me. If you want, I'd be happy to talk with Brian about the cuts to make. But you need to get feedback on it.
So one problem with cutting county parks and libraries, for that matter, also public safety, is that when you make those cuts, it has, studies show, it has a negative impact on housing values in the area. So it's like cutting off your nose to spite your face. So we can close a couple parks, but what's that going to do?
You can prioritize based on usage of those parks, okay? It's a simple way to do it. And, it may be, and, I think you said there's grass cutting on 207 public properties. I mean, maybe don't cut them as often. I'm just saying, you've got to look at substantial service reductions as part of this process, or you're doing a disservice to the taxpayers.
Okay, thanks, Roger. I appreciate it. Hold on, let me answer off this card, then I'll take your question. If you could come up to the mic, if you don't mind. Does Newcastle County have any email lists to communicate news and events like this town hall? Context, we heard today through an email blast from our development. First of all, I want to particularly point out, Mark, I imagine there are people here, I know Councilwoman Kilpatrick helped spread the news, but I also want to call out Mark Blake for making sure that really thousands of people knew this town hall was happening tonight, so thank you very much. Jason, can you comment about our email list? This is Jason Miller, the Director of Communications for the county.
Good evening, everybody. So we used a number of ways to market these forums, which are continuing through May. We have pushed out word through all of our social media accounts. I realize that not all of you are on social media, but Facebook, Twitter, across multiple accounts in county government. We used some earned media, so WDEL is here tonight, and the Hockessin Community News are here tonight. They both have run stories about these programs. We appreciate the Civic League and the Civic Associations pushing this word out. I have a press release distribution list that you are welcome to join if you would like to get all of our press releases Those releases are marketed in other ways through other avenues, posted to our website. We are sending messages now through Nextdoor, which is another social media software package that constituents use. So if you get Nextdoor messages, you'll learn about these forums. I hope that answered your question.
So basically, if you want to be added to the email list, come up to Jason, give him your email. He'll be happy to add you to the list. Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Meyer, I don't have any questions. I've got a few comments. I would also like to extend my thanks to you for coming out here this evening and to being very frank with us as to what the budget situation is. I am an emergency physician. I work at Christiana Hospital. I worked at Wilmington Hospital today in the emergency department. I'll work at Middletown in the emergency department tomorrow. I am very concerned, given the contacts I have with county police officers and with county paramedics, to how thinly stretched they have become. And I applaud you for beginning to reverse that. Just one anecdotal story. I heard from one officer who was the only officer available for a call on Brackenville Road, and where did he have to come from? Naaman's Road. Well, that's a problem. And we need to support our county officers, and we need to support our county paramedics. Another comment I have is that as a physician, the most important thing to the health of everybody in this room is the sewer system. So it's not a popular thing, it's not talked about a lot, but it's extremely important. And there were a number of comments here tonight about the healthcare expenses. Well, one of the reasons we have high healthcare expenses is because we as a population are a little bit overweight. And one of the best ways that we can deal with that is county parks. And we are absolutely cutting off our nose to spite our face if we were to cut back on county parks. So again, thank you to you and your entire team.
Thank you. You also, we emphasize questions. You, of course, are welcome to make comments. They don't need to be, it's one of the main reasons we're here. Go ahead, Bill.
I met or went to the meeting Matt had last week, and one of the things that I had mentioned to you that at that meeting, I encourage you to reach out to our General Assembly members, all of them in Newcastle County. Even if you got a breakdown, bring them into a breakfast or a brunch or something, and emphasize the issue that we're confronted with as far as our budgeting. They've raised the transfer tax fee up to 4%, in which we only get 1.5%. At one point in time, we got all of it for a couple of years, wasn't it?
I don't think we ever got all of it.
Or half of it. But that was at 3%. So to get it half of it again, that would be 0.5%. The potential that there may be an increase in property sales over time, it would be beneficial and generate a fair amount of funding. I know at one time we were really fat with it before the collapse of everything in 2007, 2008. The other issue, personally, and I'm sure the Civic League might have a broader position on the issue. Personally, I'm not overly concerned about my individual expense as far as the increase. What I'm concerned about is you're talking about attriting the size of county government through retirements and not replacing positions. Empty positions would not be filled and eliminated altogether, while you're asking me for 15% increase in my tax. So essentially, I'm going to get a reduction in service plus a 15% increase in my tax rate. That doesn't correlate to me. I have value for parks. I have value for libraries. I have value for many of the things that the county government does. So to ask me for 15% and tell me you're not going to provide me equal services with that increase in cost, I have a serious problem with that. Finally, the development community needs to take more responsibility. And as far as I'm concerned, the land use department should be self-sufficient, if not generate money for the county. If you're writing, construction permits and that type of stuff, all the expenses that go in through that process should be totally burdened on the developer, and he can pass it on when he sale the new property. That doesn't happen. Simultaneously, there's this big discussion that Mark and I have participated in about level of service and what's necessary, which, based on the questions that were presented and the way the meetings were structured, implies some empathy to reducing level of service transportation requirements, intersection expansions and stuff, or requirements for new development planning. Having the land use department not representing my interests, potentially generating more transportation and traffic issues in Newcastle County. That department not being self-sufficient, asking me for 15% increase while cutting services to parks, libraries, and other things, I don't think is a good way to go. I'm empathetic to the 15% increase, but I need to see my services maintained, if not improved, for that money. Thanks.
Thank you. One thing I'll say is we have to date decreased annual spending by over $6 million without any impact on services whatsoever. And the fiscal year 19 budget we're proposing that decreases expenditures, working with outside grants and collaborating with other governments actually increases services. For example, the $400,000 grant I spoke with at the library that will have, at the Route 9 library, that will have a meaningful impact on that community. The mental health grant I just spoke about, things like text to 911. So we are doing things to dramatically increase service levels. What we're doing is we're doing it intelligently, and we're looking for those zero or low cost expenditure ways to expand services meaningfully while not choosing to do the very expensive things that either you won't notice or have minimal impact on service levels. Try it at home. If there are no other questions, my team Ricky, come talk to us privately. My team will be around the room. And also, finally, Jason, raise your hand. Jason will be in back. If you want to go to mybill.nccde.org, see the personal impact this proposed tax increase will have on you. He'll show it to you. Thank you very much for coming tonight. We only have 9 more of these left, so make sure to check the schedule out on our Facebook page and on nccde.org. Thank you.